I Barely Got Here is a collection of stories and conversations based on 24 years in law enforcement. You have the right to be disturbed by some of the content or disagree with the viewpoints. Anything you hear can and will be dosed with sarcasm and dark humor. You have the right to know the discussions will often be graphic with language and themes that are intended for a mature audience. Do you understand your rights? Then buckle up, Buttercup. We're going 10-8. Hello and welcome back to I Barely Got Here. I'm your host, Kevin Booncher. Hey, and today I'm happy to say I've got a guest in with me by the name of Brian. Brian and I used to work together with the Tempe Police Department almost into the decades, I should say. Well, I'll let Brian kind of introduce himself and then we'll go from there.
Hello, I am Brian. Yes, it is true. Kevin was my boss. Greatest boss ever.
Yeah, question.
But anyway, I've been a police officer since 1995. I was in patrol, obviously, when I started, and that was super fun. And then I was an RTO, so that's where you're at the academy, and you're like a recruit training officer, and that was a huge mistake because I had to run, and I don't really like that, and that really was traumatic, so I didn't really like that. So I did that for a little bit, and I was an FTO. I like that because I like being super bossy. So
what's FTO?
Field training officer.
There you go.
So I had somebody with me, and just kind of like it was like a partner, but they're new, and you're kind of evaluating them. And I really like that. Like I said, I liked having somebody there. I loved telling people what to do. It was super fun. So I liked that a lot. And then a couple bosses suggested that I go into narcotics or drug enforcement or different things like that. So I was at we used to do like banquets for awards or stuff every year. I don't think they do anymore, but a sergeant came up to me and he said, "Hey, I saw that you put in for narcotics." And I was like, "Yes." And then he says, "I also saw that you don't test very well." And I was like, "Oh, that's true too. Does that mean I didn't get it?" And he's like, "Well, don't you speak Spanish?" And I was like, "Yes." And he's like, "Okay, well, we need another Spanish speaker, so I think we're going to have a spot for you." And then it was funny, as he left, he's like, "Hey, just real quick, would you mind letting yourself go physically?" And I was like, "What do you mean, like my appearance or something?" And he's like, "Yeah, because we're kind of going into a different phase and we're looking for some guys that could, do some undercover stuff and street level." And I said, "Bro, you have no idea how far I can let myself go. I will make you wish you never said that, And then I went into narcotics and I never really left. So I did other aspects of narcotics, and I think for a little bit, I got sideways with some guys on the street, so they found out who I was, so I had to go to a different group. And that's actually where I started working with Kevin, because they knew who I was, and they said they were going to, do whatever. And so I started doing like fugitive stuff and then doing narcotic investigations, but like outside the city where they didn't know me. I think they were just being dramatic, but they were like, "Oh, we know who he is." And the community of dope in the city that we were working in is kind of tight, so everybody knows each other. So when you take a burn and they know who you are, it goes badly for a little bit. I mean, I don't think they're really going to kill me or nothing, but they supposedly knew where I lived, and it was just silly. So anyway, I went to the fugitive apprehension thing, and that was really cool. And then I eventually went back into narcotics and just do, like I said, different investigations. There's street level, mid-level, conspiracy level, which I'm still pretty much doing now. So
the big takeaway to that is basically it's all undercover work.
Yeah, a lot of undercover work from like 2001-ish to 2009 or so, probably too long because you can get kind of weird. But and we've talked before. It's like I said, I kind of think the undercover stuff is a younger guy's game. Like I always say, like Thundercats, man, that's what you want to have, like young Thundercats out there doing that undercover stuff. Because you get a little older, it's harder. Like I knew my undercover stuff had kind of ended because this guy introduced me one time buying heroin, and he was like, "Hey, I'm going to introduce you as my coworker. So just go over and tell him you know me and you can get the heroin." So I went over and got it, and then I came back, and the suspect called the informant, and he was like, "Hey, I didn't know overweight Kurt Warner used heroin. You didn't tell me that, did you know?" And the guy's like, "What do you mean?" And he's like, "What is the guy you just sent to me? Is that guy?" And he goes, "Well, bro, it's not a cop." And the suspect goes, "Yeah, I know he's not a cop. He's pretty heavy. There's no way he's a cop. Cops are fit, and they don't use heroin." So I don't know where you met that guy, but he looked pretty old, and he looked like Kurt Warner. So I was like, that kind of made me a little bit like super sad. I was like, really? He said that? Maybe my time here is done.
It happens to all of us.
It does.
However,
Yes.
I question the Kurt Warner. I'm not seeing it.
At that time, perhaps. I don't know. Kurt Warner was, this guy's obviously on heroin, so there could be, he wasn't like the sharpest.
So you could have been a black female, and he could have technically said, I think that was a heavy Kurt Warner.
Could have.
Okay.
There was a lot of, like I said, there's different things that occur, but that kind of leads up, I was kind of done at that point, and I was doing a little bit of stuff, but then this thing that we're going to talk about, I think, is how I eventually, that's my last thing I do. So the last undercover thing I do is the topic of today's conversation.
Oh, wow. So, and I'm just going to go back a little bit. So Brian technically still is, but was a phenomenal UC or an undercover, did literally thousands of undercover purchases, primarily for drugs, but also delved into some other issues that, again, today's story is based on one of those, but just did some phenomenal work to the point of when you have a guy like him, he's almost enough to keep you busy all on his own, let alone when you've got 3, 4, 5 other people on your squad. So really enjoyed the time with him. And we're going to try to stay on topic, but probably between Brian and I, with all the years that we worked together and all the things that happened, there's a lot of material here. So I'm really hoping to get him back in here. And again, now, like I said, he's kind of, you've moved on with your career. You matured and you're doing some very large, high level narcotics type investigations, which is great. The other thing I will say is that he's literally 2 months.
I am literally paychecks away from the end.
Paychecks away. Yeah. So he is closing in on the end, and I'm super happy for him, and I know he's ready to move on and do some new things as well. Anyway, so that gives you an idea what Brian's all about, and probably learn some more things as we do maybe another episode here or there. But without much further ado, let's get into tonight's episode, Hammered. Now, this episode does have some similarities, I will say, back to episode number 2, if you guys remember, was a child molester / child porn collector / just, dirty, nasty human being. But there's not a whole lot of similarity after that. So today's episode is going to deal with another person that was in possession, so to speak, of child pornography. And I'm going to kick it back over to Brian because it kind of started on that side. So Brian, give us the very beginning of this thing.
What happened with this investigation is an individual lost his thumb drive or flash drive or whatever you call it in a parking lot of, I believe, like a movie theater in the city. And then somebody found it, and eventually it got its way to the police department because they had seen some images on it that they recognized as, child porn. So obviously that's a huge deal, and they're going to go to whatever lengths to try to figure out, who these potential victims are and who the suspect is, who was the actual owner of this thumb drive. And I call it a thumb drive, but that's what I think it was. So at some point they're going through this drive, and they find some receipts and paperwork that does give them a name. So they're like, okay, we think we know it's this person, and they do some more research like they do, and they find out that he's a lawyer, like a defense attorney.
Not only defense attorney, but on what level?
A federal level.
A federal defense attorney.
Yeah, so federal defense attorney.
Yeah.
So they figure out who it is. There's some receipts, and I think the receipts are for like hotels in Southern California, which I had stayed at this hotel, one of my faves. So I was like, oh, I'm all about that. I could totally relate to going there. So at this point, our criminal investigations division is handling the investigation there. The photos, they've reached out to the FBI because they do a lot of stuff with like internet crime, sex trafficking, child pornography. And I think we had one detective at the time assigned to stuff like that, but they were still working with the FBI.
Right.
So at some point they decide, oh, we figured out who it is. Let's see if we can get him to take, repossession of the item, to admit it's his and receive it.
And so why would we want to do that?
So they basically, at this point, I guess he could say, oh, that's not mine. You didn't see me drop it. I don't know why that stuff's on there. Maybe the guy that found it put it on there. Who knows? just something like this is so serious. They definitely want to have a strong case against this cat. And so they're going to do whatever they can. So they're brainstorming stuff. And at this point, our group is Special Investigations, and we're not involved yet. So they come up with a plan, and they're like, okay, we're gonna get somebody to basically call him and reach out to him and try to get him to admit it's his and then take possession of it. So they're like, well, how can we do that? And they're talking, and then we need to find somebody more, maybe like a junkie or like or someone strung out or addicted to drugs or struggling with a dependency,
dirty,
something like that. Something street, kind of street. Like I remember we went through different scenarios, like what kind of person. And
so the reason that they have to start thinking along that path, as opposed to all the stuff that you see in the movies and on TV and everything, is that, the average detective is not some dirty looking street person. So, when some of these bigger name actors are at 1 minute, they're pushing paper at a desk in a suit and tie, and the next they're all dirtied up working undercover on the street. Doesn't work that way. So our detective bureau, they have their job and they do their thing. But when they need undercover operations things done, then they would come to our unit. And then I'll let Brian take it back from there.
So at that time, I was super embracing the undercover look, because when you go in, you can get long hair, you can grow a beard, piercings, whatever. And so I envisioned myself kind of looking like a modern day Fabio. But it turned out that I was actually more like Smeagol from Lord of the Rings. So I didn't necessarily have a mullet. I had a skullet because I had been losing my hair. So anyway, but still I embraced this life. And so I'm all about it. And I think the other aspect was if they had a guy call the suspect that was well-spoken and seemed like, more legit, he may be fearful that he wouldn't agree to take possession of his item, rather than somebody who was more like, lack of a better term, like in the spoon, like on drugs, using heroin, something that he would like have superiority over, like,
on the street.
Yeah. So street like, person. I can talk this person out, whatever. So that was the idea.
Right. And then the last on that I would add is that if and when there is a potential for a face-to-face meet that would have to occur, well, you don't want to use a different person, so we can't really have like a dick set the stuff up on the phone and then come to, ultimately it's Brian, hey, we need you to work UC on this thing. He doesn't have the background. He doesn't, he hasn't listened to the guy's voice. There's a whole bunch of unknowns there. And a lot of times when you're setting things up like this, because like you're saying, we're trying to develop as much evidence as we can for a good airtight case, you will have to have a face-to-face at a point. Even if there's no communication, sometimes you still are going to have to see the face-to-face, and that just bolsters the case. So anyway, you got to do it all. You got to be a one-stop shop. So they're looking for that dirty street person. You can listen to Brian. He still has a lot of the lingo because obviously he's still working. You just can't pull that off unless you are in one of those assignments that he was in at the time. So go ahead.
So I was pretty excited. So they reached out to me and said, hey, would you be willing to do this? It was different than what I was normally doing with like drugs and stolen stuff. So I thought that was really cool. Plus, I thought it was a good opportunity to, like stuff like this we don't see as often, and it's pretty heinous. So and they're talking about lots of kids that he has pictures of, pretty bad. And that's kind of like what you want to be a police officer, to kind of like get these guys, have some accountability, get these guys off the streets. So I thought it was pretty cool that they asked, and I was definitely all about it. I was like, oh, I'll totally do that. And then they said, though, that I needed to look at the thumb drive, and so I knew what I was talking about. And so I never looked at anything like that. I never worked in a unit like that, so I never seen any of those kind of things. So I sit down with the detectives and like FBI guy, and they're going through the thumb drive. And at first I was like, that's kind of mild. I mean, it's like 10-year-old, 12-year-old. They're not nude. They're like partially clothed, but in kind of weird poses. So I was like, that's disturbing, but not. And then the guy was like, hold on. And then they start to get to the images that are so rare, so coveted by this, the type of individuals that, collect this and are involved in this. That's when things, full on off the rails, where it's like, that is some craziness, like infants clearly being direct, like posed by people, like, using their hands to pose them, actual intercourse. It was the craziest thing I ever saw. And I was like, I'm done with this. I'm good. I've seen enough. You just cannot get that out of your head forever. It was so awful. Like I said, the guys at work and the men and women that work those units, to me, about PTSD all day on that.
Well, and it's funny you say that, because I said the exact same thing again at that earlier episode, that you don't look at this stuff because you want to. You look at it only if you absolutely have to. And just like Brian said, you'll never forget those images. They're absolutely horrendous and horrible. And you'll never understand the mindset that it takes for someone to be even attracted to that type of activity, let alone possess it and go back to it time after time after time. So yes, kudos to the folks that do it. And they don't stay in those units a long time, though. Sometimes a lot of people can only do it so long, and then they're out. But anyway, a bit of a sidetrack. So as part of the case, again, in case something comes up in conversation, or if there's an inference to something on the drive, Brian had to see some of it. He's got to get an idea of kind of some of that content and everything there. So unfortunately, he pulled the short stick, and he had to look at that garbage.
So as we go through the drive and stuff, so I got a good feel, so I can talk my way into the suspect about, I've seen it enough to say that I know what it's about, and that he needs to, somehow compensate me for giving this back to him. And hopefully, obviously, the end result is we want him to take possession of it, so we can, solidify the case.
So how'd you get a number for him? Do you remember?
So I think that was on the receipt for the hotel.
Okay.
So I was going to talk about the hotel thing with him, because I was like, I've stayed there before.
Sure.
So it was like, I thought it was good. And then I did ask the FBI guy, I was like, do you think this is going to work? He's a lawyer. He knows that if he gets caught with this, he's going to do like all day times 20. He's going to go away forever.
Forever.
And the FBI guys, you don't understand, like, this collection that he's amassed over time, it's definitely nothing like over time, like he said decades, is so valuable to these individuals. Like, it's like he asked me if I collected baseball cards, and I was like, oh yeah, I used to. And he's like, some of these images that he has are like the Honus Wagner, the Ty Cobb of child porn. Like there's one, this particular one with a baby. And he said, this image is so well known and so well traded and so coveted that we, the FBI, know who the child is. It was European, but they know who the child was. A very famous image, and he has that. So he is going to do, as long as it's played right, he will do whatever he can to get that back. Not necessarily to avoid getting hemmed up or busted, but just to get that collection back, because it's going to just drive him crazy that he spent maybe 2 decades collecting, and now it's gone. So I thought that was interesting. I was like, okay, well then I'm gonna lay this on thick when I talk to this cat, So they set it up, and where I call him, and I can't remember specific. Like it went. The conversation went on for a while, but he didn't hang up. He engaged me, and we're back and forth about like, hey, I found this drive. I looked at it. I know what's on it. You're gonna want that back, I assume. And he's like, well, that's not mine. And I was like, okay, well, your name's on this receipt. And I even stayed at that place. So, and then I was joking with him. I was like, and I know what that place costs a night, bro. So you all rich, man, you give me something. You're probably a lawyer or something like that. Or a doctor. I need money. I'm hurting. I'm struggling. You need to compensate me. I'm a good citizen. Turn this in. What are you going to do? And so he was, well, let's talk about this. I'm not saying that that's mine. Someone might have, but I would like that thumb drive. And I was like, bro, I'm in the game. I'm all about the game. I know what's up. I know what's on there. You're gonna compensate me for giving you this back. And eventually he agrees to like throw me a few $100 or something like that. And I'm trying to get more money for it because I think it's worth more. But he really wants it. He's like, oh no, I needed to get that in the right hands. And he's trying to do enough to like distance himself from the actual like to be culpable of it, like. But at the same time, you can tell it's that thing that the FBI guy said.
Right.
He wants that item.
Very
so
valuable.
He's kind of like ignoring, oh man, I could catch a case on this.
Yeah.
And it's just like, I got to get that. Like he's got it, and I got to have that. Right. So common sense had kind of like went to the side, and it was just like full on, almost like an addiction, like he's struggling. So it was like, oh, I got to get that. So
which again speaks to the level of buy-in and complete little loss for words, but just how important and valuable this collection was to him. Here's an extremely well-educated person who, works in the justice system and understands how things work. He, if he didn't have a a good knowledge. He would have a base knowledge on how police conduct investigations with things like this. So there should have been red lights flashing for him to dive out of this thing the second that it started. But again, it just shows you the level of commitment and the importance that this filth is worth to these guys. I mean, it is their life. It is one of their most important lifelong possessions. So
definitely. And that's, I think, how he was, like, exactly what you said is like, he knows, how cops work. I don't know what defense work he did, but he may have defended people involved with child pornography. So he knows, all the right things to say and to basically say, nah, I'm not doing that. That's not mine. Right. Or hang up. Nothing like that.
Yeah, terminate
right?
the call.
Right. And I think somebody told me that when they played it for, like, in court, people were laughing because it, like, with me saying, like, bro, you rich, y'all staying at that place. Right. Y'all you're gonna pay me. Right. And I think he goes, well, what do you do? And I was like, man, I work at the theater, And so, I don't make that much, and that's where he lost it, because he was trying to verify because he lost it at theater. He was at a movie and he lost it. Or somewhere near a movie theater. Well, so eventually he agrees that we agree on a monetary amount, and we agree the day we're going to meet, and we're going to meet at the theater, because I was like, hey, I'm working. I'm going to come out of the theater and I just give it to you, and you give me the money, and then we're Gucci. I mean, we're good. So then you can just leave.
Right.
So he's like, okay. So I thought, like I said, I thought it went well. I thought, okay, that's good. He's going to do it. That's dumb, but he's going to do it. And I didn't expect, like, later the story evolves, but I didn't think he was going to take it to the level that he took it, He agreed, so we're going to meet. And then it goes back to the group that I was working, and Kevin was the boss, of how we're going to tactically approach it, which I have no part of. I'm not into that. So they were then going to handle, like, how they're going to arrest him and take custody of him.
Right. So, when Brian keeps mentioning that we want this guy to take possession of this drive again, I mean, obviously we're not going to give him the literal drive, and the chances are that the drive is never going to leave, custody. But at the same time, we want to do everything right to that exact point to show that he was basically going to go through. He was going to follow through with this, and the meet was going to occur. So I'm going to backtrack just a little bit. So as occurred frequently with Detective Brian, other bureaus, because again, he's such a prolific UC guy and did just tons of work, and he never quit working. He was actually approached to do this by our detectives bureau before I had been talked to, which, kind of jumps the chain of command. But again, that kind of happened. So I remember hearing about it, and then what were we talking? I cruised down to your cubicle, and I was like, are you doing something that I might need to know about here? And of course, Brian dances around, tries to be nice about it, and says, yeah, that's what we're going to do. And it's not like I'm going to stop it, but,
I said I've been chosen.
A little annoyed.
I've been chosen by a higher power.
Yeah. Which the higher power was higher than me, so basically that trumps me. But anyway, so just like Brian said, no big deal, we're going to do that. He worked all of his UC magic on the phone, basically with the detectives, and then the rest of my group, we did all of our other work, so I wasn't really privy to all the details. But where I do come in is then I started to coordinate with the lieutenant for the Detectives Bureau as to how we're going to take this guy off. So again, understanding the level of importance that this is to them, you also just never know what people are willing to do to get it back, and or if they are found out, how far they'll go to either extricate themselves out or basically go all in and that's it, I'm done, kill themselves. You just don't know. So there's a big plan put into place. We have surveillance units put into place. We identify where he lives. We did a little bit of surveillance up there where he lives to confirm that he was there in the days that led up to the actual day. And there's a number of things that were put into place because, again, that's the whole idea. Brian works on the specifics and the phone call and the nuances and the thumb drive, and I have to see the bigger picture of the safety side. And okay, well, what if he does this, and how are we going to do that? And are we actually going to have Brian arrive at the scene? Are we going to do anything with that? So there's a lot of coordination there that I do that's not truly the important part, which is setting this guy up. So, the day of, we come down to it, and it was decided that I don't think you weren't at the scene at all.
No, luckily they said I didn't have to go to the movie theater and get all like that. Right. He agreed to get it. He said enough on the phone. I'm going to basically say I'm there, and meet me, and when they see him, because they were following him from his house,
right,
then they're gonna just take him into custody.
Right. So the day of, the day comes, and again, this guy's he's committed. We're confident that he's not going to flake out. If this was a dope deal, you call it dope time, those guys half the time they flake, they're late, they don't show up, they reschedule. I mean, it happens over and over and over. But these guys, these child molester types with this child porn, man, that is their life. So anyway, day of, the lieutenant and I remember it very vividly. We were sitting in a parking lot and talking, and I had all my surveillance team set up on the guy's house because we wanted to follow him from the house. Again, it's just that other nail in the coffin that, here's where this guy lives. Here's where he left from. We take him away from the house and we follow him over to the movie theater location. And then at the movie theater location, I had a number of people out on foot in plain clothes, basically undercover guys as well. And they were going to effect the arrest. So again, Brian's out of the picture, so I don't have to worry about any kind of face-to-face. I don't have to worry about this guy just going full nutty and trying to assault Brian as we do a face-to-face that's close to where there can be an exchange hand-to-hand. I just have to worry about getting this guy ID'd and then taking him off without anybody getting hurt. So the theater, he arrives, the mobile surveillance team lands him at the theater. Hey, he's here. He's out here. He's walking in. We get an eye on him. He's a pretty good-sized guy. He was an older guy, but remember, he was physically a pretty large person. So we picked him out pretty easily, but looking furtive as hell, looking all around, skittish, nervous, anxiety level to the roof. I mean, he stuck out like a sore thumb, even if we didn't have, photographs to identify him with as it was. So this guy, he walks over to the vicinity of the theater, and I don't recall specifically if it looked like he was going to leave. There was a little bit of a mix-up and a little bit of a delay because the plan was that we would have like 2 to 3 UC guys grab him, and then we had a guy or two in a uniform that would come in and just give us a visual presence. Well, for whatever reason, this one guy who will remain unnamed because I don't want to embarrass him, he made the determination that he needed to grab this guy and grab him right now. And so I'm still walking up and I've got my little earpiece in and I'm listening kind of to the radio and trying to sort things out and manage bringing guys in. And the next thing I know, I hear this big commotion in the front of the theater. And as me and another guy come running up there, we see my guy, the unnamed guy, is rolling around and wrestling with this attorney, this suspect. There's a gun laying on the sidewalk and then there's a hammer on the sidewalk. And so I'm running up there and it's that split second of what the hell is going on? Well, what had happened was attorney suspect had decided he was going to bring him a hammer. Just whatever reason, we'll never know. Was he gonna whack Brian in the melon and take this thumb drive? Was he bringing it just to try to, defend himself in case shady Brian was going to take his money and then run off with the thumb drive? We'll never know. But the gun, that belonged to my guy. Because my guy in the melee, gun falls out of holster, falls on the sidewalk. And again, we're plain clothes, so people don't know what the hell's going on. And eventually some poor bystander starts walking over toward the gun to pick it up. And so we yell at him. We're like, don't touch the gun. And anyway, but we do get the guy into custody. And so everything worked out from that perspective. So from your side of it, what else happened post-arrest?
So after he gets arrested and he's got the hammer, like we said, we don't know if that was like I'm bonking this guy, he'll never, I'll get my thumb drive and full Scooby-Doo mystery, bonk, you're done, who knows? Or he was, I think originally he said he was going to break the thumb drive in front of me. Oh. And they were like, bro, that's not even, what? That's dumb. No one would do that. Look at this, no. So who knows? He probably he was scared and stuff. He was older, but they also wanted to hit his house. So once he's away from the house, they want to hit his house, hit his place because
what's hit his house, Brian?
They do a search warrant at his house.
Thank you.
And they're going to hit that because they're hoping that he has other images, maybe get it into his computer and do search warrants there and find other evidence before he could get rid of anything like that. After that, they take him into custody, and I don't know what happens after that because the other detectives did that. And then they go to his house, And then things get super crazy at his house, because they start looking at pictures and they do find something. And that's where things go a different direction, where
so
some of the images are, they're basically tying them to other things.
So we'll delve into that a little further. So when you're talking about they're looking at pictures, they're looking at what, like pictures hanging on the wall?
No, they're trying
pictures
to get into his computer.
Okay.
Typically, I guess there would be possible that they may look for, like, if you actually had like hard photos, like still photos, but I don't think so. I think they were looking for a computer. Different things on computers and drives, that maybe more images, because here in Arizona, like, you can get busted per image.
It is per image.
So,
absolutely.
And nobody has two.
Right.
It's like 10,000, hundreds, thousands.
Right.
It's insane. So that's why you're so busted if you get caught for this. So busted. Anyway.
They know this,
They do, but
a lot of
again,
these people, they know it, but
yeah.
it just shows, again, it shows to the sickness that they've got to want to see this. So what Brian is alluding to here is that images that were located on the computer that were at his home did match up to some of the images in the child porn, and to put it more in a disgusting fashion, it was later determined that he essentially had images of his grandchildren.
I believe when they found images, I can't remember how they linked it up, either at the house or on the thumb drive, but they eventually, as they started going through the investigation, they saw something of his. I don't remember if it was a watch or something very specific.
Piece of jewelry, that's right.
Yeah, something like that. And they were like, and then they matched a photo of a kid, or they're like, wait, that kid's right there, and where it was family members, I believe grandchildren, and I don't remember the specifics of the image, but they were explicit.
Yeah.
I don't remember the specifics of what was happening in the images, and this was unknown to the parents of these children, who happened to be related to the suspect. And I can't remember if it's his daughter or his son. I don't remember that, but this family is then told
right
at the scene eventually.
And the other thing, none of the investigators knew any of this as well.
No.
Because, when you start looking into a suspect and who they are, you're not even really thinking about grandchildren potential type of thing.
Because you're not in his house.
Not in his house, not even a concern. So when these poor investigators start to dig up this material on the computer, and then they're matching up, like Brian said, however it was, that, oh my God, this is material. This is his family that he is. And I remember there was molestation. And that's part of the reason the hand was in the photograph with the distinctive jewelry that ID'd it as our suspect. So now they're putting this all together. Now, in an episode or two, you've heard me talk about making death notifications and making some of those. Well, holy hell, think about trying to make a notification to a family member that your father is in possession of these photographs. And, oh, by the way, some of them are your children. I mean, I can't even imagine. And from what I recall, and Brian can help me out with this, and it was a daughter, from my recollection, she lost it.
Yeah,
she
it was
idea.
Definitely, it's next level meltdown for sure, because not alone, first year, because they showed up in an effort almost of support of the suspect, of like,
as you would expect,
of course. And why is this dude hemmed up? Why is he arrested? He could have never have done that. That's level one, right? Okay, a parent's been arrested who you care for, love for, whatever. And then you're told what the crime is. Now you're at level 2 of meltdown, of like, oh my God, that's awful. I can't believe that. Well, then you bypass levels 3 through 7, and you hit level 8, which is the final level of, and some of these pictures are your kids.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no way to explain it. I've obviously never experienced it. It would be actually heartbreaking, devastation. Again, you're not recovering from that ever. So it was absolutely tragic all the way around. The whole event was completely tragic, awful story. And like, it just would take a turn every time where it was like, and then now this. It was just, the whole thing was just insane. Yeah,
one of those, just when you thought it couldn't get any worse, and then it takes that next step. So I don't recall the interaction with him and the Dicks. Like, did he talk, or did he lawyer up, or?
I don't remember. I thought that he asked for a lawyer, but that I'm not positive, because like I said, once that was done, and then they were like, well, I think now that some of these images are his kids. I was like, I'm going to call it a day on this, and I'm really excited about these enchiladas that I just found. So we're done.
Right.
I'm done with this investigation. It was too much for me. Like I said, going back to, I really commend the men and women that are fighting this type of crime, because it is definitely a different type of investigation and would wear on you, both mentally, and emotionally, like.
And the very unfortunate thing of this is not nearly as uncommon as people think.
Unfortunately, yes. I mean, yes, this does happen every day. Yep. Lots of families are affected. Yep. It is a sickness, obviously, but it's not a sickness where, a lot of times people say, like with drug addiction, or you're dealing with a dependency with maybe alcohol or gambling. Socially, people might look a different way towards drugs and stuff. Oh yeah, it's how'd you grow up? Oh, maybe you came up wrong. Were you exposed to drugs at an early age? Maybe were you exposed to drugs in the womb? That's separate. When you have an addiction and a struggle like this with pornography, with children, specifically pornography involving children, there's not a lot of places you can go outside of the criminal world. Like dark web and all that kind of stuff. You're not going to find a lot of support, as we talked about, before, and that kind of transfers to prison. It's a very you do hard, when you get busted for this, like I said, you do all day times 20. Yeah. And it's also a very hard time.
And before we jump, because I do want to talk about that as well, but the other thing I want to talk about, Brian and I have had a number of philosophical discussions over the years. Like I said, when you're doing surveillance and you're stuck in a van for hours of time, there's a lot of odd and weird things that pop up. But I do always recall that we used to talk about, when are you fully committed? Like when are you fully committed as a true thug? And we used to joke, well, as soon as you started getting tattooed above the neck and into the face, you're full thug. You're not going to recover from that. And we talk about, recidivism and things about recovering from addictions and things like that. And just like Brian said, with drugs and alcohol and gambling and all that stuff, there's always that hope, and people do recover from that. But, and I'm pretty sure Brian would agree with me on this one, if you are a child porn addict, you are never changing. You are never going to recover. You will never stop doing what you're doing. If the opportunity presents itself to molest a child and that's what your proclivity is, you will not change.
Yes, I think there's a lot of truth to be said for that. Not to mention, no one is going to want to give you the chance to change, because no one's going to say, like, okay, feeling pretty good? Yeah, I think I got it under control. Give me a chance. I might teach you this preschool. No one's going to do that. No. Right? No. And that's a whole nother conversation about what do you do with individuals who basically have this issue. Rehabilitation is not really an option per se. It's more like, how can they control it? It's not really a medication thing. And then that's why the time that they do, you're really warehousing them.
Yeah, that's all you're doing.
And you just don't want them out. I mean, it's kind of the deal with, like, they're monsters, and the adage is, we can't have these monsters roaming the quiet countryside. Right.
And that's that's one of the few times that I think the general populace would actually all be in agreement that
that's what I mean.
This is one thing. We can't let them out there.
So there's not really that audience for them like you do with drugs, gambling, and drinking, where it's like, man, I got you.
Give them a break.
There's no, like, 30-day coin for child porn. Like, check me out, 30 days, no kids. Right. It's not like that. Right. It's crazy. It's just craziness. And like I said, it's bad all around. That's why I say the hard time, and we'll get into it's troublesome, man, all day. That was just a bad deal.
Yeah. So, and again, I'm not an expert by any stretch, but I believe that, especially in other countries, they've tried castration on people like that.
And I think there's even a movie like that where somebody does that here locally. Like, it's a famous movie, and he might do it himself to try to get rid of it. Now, would that work? Who knows? Well, and plus, no one's going to authorize, like, as a government, like, sorry guys, we're doing castration. No one's going to do that. But
or you have the option.
Right, you have the option.
You can do 10 hard and then be castrated, or you can stay in prison for the rest of your life.
So it's just a totally different world, because you don't, even to get guys to come in and, like, let's talk about it. No one wants to sit with you and even talk about it. No. It's so ostracized.
You're a pariah.
You're so on a separate thing that no one's going to feel bad for you. Like I said, everybody else, you got a little bit of empathy. I've not found guys or men or women in, forget law enforcement, but anywhere. Yeah. Of like, well, I could, it is a struggle. Right. Like, I mean, you don't see that. So I'm like, that's why these sentences get carried out, and like, they're insane. Like, he's doing 100 years, but he's already like 60.
Right.
And it's just, they're sending a message every image.
Yeah.
It's awful. So that's why I thought this was rewarding that they were able to get this. I mean, tragic as it is, if there is a bright spot, and it would be very, very minute, is that he was apprehended. Whatever he was doing was stopped.
Right.
Now, we talk about like, well, the world of child pornography reigns and still goes on. Okay, yeah, it does. But that doesn't mean you don't stop. You don't try to go after the guys that do it.
Absolutely.
And if you asked him, do you feel impacted right now? You're going to prison for 100 plus. Oh yeah, I feel pretty impacted. So that part's good. So
right.
A family was destroyed, which is absolutely tragic and awful, but there is going to be consequences, and you got to pay. So, and he did.
And I kind of relate that. Again, Brian and I have had numerous conversations about the drug war and the ins and outs, and again, we could do numerous episodes on that. But my philosophy had always been that we're not winning. I doubt that we ever will. It's always going to be out there. But if by my group taking off this 20 pounds of methamphetamine keeps one kid from trying it, I said, then we've achieved the goal. Now, you want to talk about monetarily, is that fat? No, absolutely not. But, law enforcement is not a moneymaker. It's not a job that we focus primarily on the financials as any other business in the country would. So to me, that was my thing. And just like Brian said, we're never going to stop that child porn, but that guy is stopped and
exactly.
He's done. And those kids aren't going to be touched by him inappropriately any longer. And he's not going to be able to further, because again, guys, these guys breed each other. Mm. So he could have very well been grooming the next hymns. He could have had a couple of those people that he was going to start to groom through all the, again, it's a very detailed process, but we put a stop to that as well. So it is very rewarding. Those are very rewarding arrests, and I think it speaks to it because Brian remembers it very well. I remember it very well, and it was quite a long time ago. So anyway, this guy goes, he gets hung up on these. He's found guilty on numerous charges.
I think he represented himself.
He did represent himself, which again, if you remember what I said, I don't care how smart you are. Never, ever represent yourself. I don't care if it's the lowest misdemeanor, or I don't care if you're hung up on charges like this guy is. Don't ever represent yourself, because he lost, as we all figured.
It's really hard. It's pro per. It's really difficult.
It's insane.
Yeah, it's really difficult.
It's insane. You as a defendant have enough to worry about as it is, and you have way more tendency to get yourself emotionally involved and personally involved and all these other things. And
it becomes theatrical in court because your passion is misdirected because you're trying to save your life.
Right.
And it's just, it's no good. I don't understand why you would do that. But I mean, everybody. That's an option we have in this country to do
system.
That.
Yep.
But I would recommend you not take that option.
You talk to any cop, and that's going to be the first
free.
Thing. Yeah, you'll be free representation. Then every cop is going to say the same thing: don't self-represent. Don't do it. I don't care how smart you think you are. Don't do it.
No.
But anyway, for this guy, I think seeing as how we've already beat the bush that nobody has any compassion for him, I think probably people were like, yeah, go ahead, self-represent, knock yourself out. We're going to hammer you.
Yeah, it's bad.
So anyway, so he's done, and he is currently serving his life term plus 100 years or whatever he got as a result of that. But the last thing I did want to kind of hammer on, I got hammered on the mind now, see. The last thing I wanted to kind of hit on was the way that the prison environment as it relates to people that are doing these type of crimes and get locked up. And Brian and I talked a bunch about this prior. And again, I think it's another one of those things, if we really wanted to, get into the realities and the life of prison, it would be a whole other episode and we would go on too long. But I would like to kind of touch on it and let Brian give us some good explanation on what this person can expect, what happens in there when you are convicted of these type of crimes.
So if you, and this is speaking about Arizona, and also California and Arizona are kind of run the same way. There's politics involved, obviously, among the races. And when I say the races in Arizona, you're talking about whites, blacks, Hispanics, Mexicans from Mexico, and Native American. And then they have, obviously there's other races in the prison like Asian and Arabic, but they're not they're classified as others. among the gang population. So they don't have a select group. They can kind of run with whoever they want or themselves or whatever. But anyway, when you go inside and you have, particularly with this individual, this defendant was white. So when you go in, whether it be probably not at county jail, they probably keep you somewhere separate at county jail, but definitely when you hit DOC, depending on the level yard you're at, there's obviously 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 supermax, all that.
What are the levels? What does that mean?
Basic security levels. So, 1 is like probably a ranch or something, like you can walk around kind of free, maybe the yard time's good. It's not real political, like with all the races, and each race has their own thing, and they do this thing called programming, which is like working out and sticking to a certain thing. So as the yards increase, the programming and the politicalness of it increase. So that's where you get into this thing where people are always talking about check your paper. You got to check your paper. So for example, this particular defendant, he's white. He comes into the facility or into the institution, and let's say he goes into general population, which is unlikely because of his charges.
Very.
Right?
Yeah.
So his charges are sex offenses involving minors. Any sex offense actually now for the whites and for the Hispanics is considered bad. So any sex offense.
Bad by who?
By the other inmates.
By inmates
by the organizations that are running the yards,
right,
so to speak.
Right.
So they will basically, the way the whites and the Hispanics in Arizona and California, but we're talking about Arizona, the way they believe is sex offenses are bad. If your paperwork says you're convicted of a sex offense, they're going to take off on you. They're going to hurt you. They're going to smash you. They're going to stab you, whatever. They're going to slash you across the face so everybody can see you have a scar that basically designates you as someone who's all bad. That's the phrase they always use. You're all bad. You're all wrong. So unlikely this guy goes to
opposed to somebody who maybe has murdered someone during the conviction of a robbery. They're not all bad.
They're good. They're
right?
They're considered solid.
Just clarify.
Right. So they're solid.
Got it.
So they go in. Unlikely that this particular guy went in under a general population, because what would happen is he would go in and right away another of his race would say, hey, let me see your paperwork. And that paperwork said sex offense, minor, convicted. But they can find it anyway because they can look on the DOC website. They could go into the county website. They can have access to these things. They can find a way. They're going to find out. And as soon as they see that it's a sex offense with a kid, or regardless, even an indecent exposure can get you in trouble with some of the races. Yeah. They're going to get at them. So once that happens, that's when I talk about that hard time, is you're even ostracized in the prison, So, I mean, and who knows what these guys' personal opinions are, but they've got, especially with the whites, they're talking about this kind of Viking mentality of like, we're better than that. We're a higher class of individual. We don't allow that type of person, a sex offender, to be able to be present on the yard. They're not talking about hanging out. They're saying he can't be present on their yard.
They don't want him to exist.
No, he has to be smashed and be put somewhere else, right? If they don't kill him. So that's why I'm saying it's very dangerous. And people will allude to things like, well, how'd they find out? Well, the guards told them. No one, I never worked in a prison. I was never in prison. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if that's just convict talk, but they do find out who these guys. So I would imagine this guy is in a yard it's called sensitive needs, SNY, where protective custody, where he's away from that, or he's with other people who are also of the same thing. I
was just going to say.
But they can get at him too, because again, like we talked about before, if I'm a white inmate and whoever's running the yard or holds the keys or whatever they say is like, hey, so-and-so's all bad. I just saw his paperwork or we just found out. Go and break them off. Then they would have to go, and you're going to get plenty of guys to raise their hand.
And why would you do the work?
Because you're trying to put in work for your people, if you're white or Hispanic, you're trying to put in for your people, and that can give you status and the thing, and it can kind of move you along. It can also allow you to get certain tattoos that can get sanctioned then. If you put in the work for your people, you can get tattoos, it's just a status thing. And then, you get off on somebody and you're kind of popular. It's very high school-esque. Like, I took off on that child molester. And then everybody's kind of like really cool with you. I mean, there's a story that's not too long on somebody who basically they found out he was bad and he was a child molester. So they got at him. They beat him up pretty badly, pretty savagely. And as he's being led off the yard by the guards, because obviously you're not allowed to beat up other prisoners, he's getting, they're going to put him in the hole for doing that. As he's leaving, you've got all these other members, other white guys, clapping and doing like a Heil Hitler and like, all this kind of thing. Imagine your life where you're like, I've been kind of on the outside, everybody thinks I'm doing bad. You go into prison and all of a sudden you're like a warrior and you're like, hey, this person's bad. He's bad for our people. Go ahead and break him off,
Right.
And you're celebrated.
Right.
Right. It gives you kind of a sense of purpose because it's so boring in there, So I don't know. So I think that's why I say, I don't know what happened to this guy, but the road of like struggle doesn't just end after you get busted. No. It just carries on. It's awful,
Well, and I always, again, we were talking, and I always find it so interesting how, you can take these, like I said a minute ago, so you can kill 3 people while you're robbing a bank or something, but you're still allowed to call this guy essentially the scum of the earth and make the call that, well, he needs to die. They're all bad, but I'm not so bad kind of thing. But again, it's that mentality. And well, we know he's still alive.
He is. He just looked. He's still alive.
Yeah, we pulled him up. He's doing time here in a penitentiary in Arizona, and so he is still alive. I'm sure he's fairly aged at this point.
And he doesn't look like he has any like real bad facial scars or anything like what they got at him already.
Right.
So I would imagine he's probably in a protective custody where they put other sex offenders, and that's probably a low. And he's older, so he's probably on a low level yard.
Yeah.
1 or 2. Where maybe the politics aren't very strong.
Right.
I mean,
he'll never get out.
Never.
Never.
He's dying in prison.
You talk about people that kill somebody, and you would think they would never get out, and they knock down a 25 or a 30 year, and they'll get out.
They could get out.
This guy, he will never see the light of day.
Even like like Charles Manson passed away, but like some of the people that did that, they do have parole dates,
right?
And they come up, it's not going to happen,
right?
But this person is. There's no parole date.
Right.
There's nothing. You are dying in prison.
Yeah.
Right. And then you could go forever on a debate of whether or not it's deserved. He's not going to get a lot of sympathy.
Right.
Right. He's in all day. Okay.
Well, the easiest thing to say is, well, I'll tell you what, if you want him out, do you want him around your kids? And there's not a sane person around that's
no one's going to take that kind of chance because we know that like people who are victimized, it's forever thing.
Yep.
They struggle with things, and it's absolutely awful the kind of damage that can be done. So it's awful.
Brian did a lot more UC work than I did, but if we started to compare notes, what I used to like to do is I'd arrest somebody and you'd find out kind of what their background was. Molestation was prevalent. Molestation was one of those things. I wouldn't say that it was as much as them saying, yeah, my dad beat me or my parents were drug abusers or whatever, but molestation came up quite frequently, especially with females.
With the females.
A lot of those females, it was shocking to hear, you'd start talking to them. So, hey, when did your life take a turn? Oh, it was when my uncle molested me, or it was when my cousin molested me. I mean, oh my God, it was over and over.
With the females, a lot of things would start with either when my dad left or when this person, the phrase we would use is touch my knee because you didn't want to get really explicit.
Yeah.
So a lot of things would start with when this person touched my knee, about when I was, molested or assaulted or different things. I mean, some of this stuff is like early on, and it's not just like a one-time occurrence. Like they might be, molested from ages like 1 to 8 or something. Absolutely, just horrific things. I mean, I don't know this guy's background. Maybe he was molested. A lot of times, the guys that do that, they may have a background like that. But again,
probably
same thing though. No one is going to say, "Oh yeah, you kind of came up wrong. I can see how that would have happened."
Right. No passes.
There is no passes.
No
for that.
passes,
and there never will be.
No. And there shouldn't be.
No, because people's most prized thing is their children.
Absolutely.
And when you hear people say things like, even guys that are not about that life, about like, hurting people, whatever, you always get them in a debate of like, well, what would you do if somebody like did something to your kids? Whether it's real talk or not, you do get a very hardcore response of like, oh, I'd kill that person, I'd do this, I'd do that. Who knows if it was true? Doesn't matter. But it is. I mean, that's our most precious resource is our children. And so like when you start to mess with them in any way, the response is going to be swift, Well,
I don't think there's any other crime that elicits such a strong emotional response. Maybe rape. Mm-hmm. If you are the husband or the boyfriend or the father or the brother.
Oh, for sure. A lot of your sexual assault stuff, because you're kind of doing two things. You're assaulting them and you're also taking stuff away.
Yes.
They're taking their innocence away if they're a child or whatever. And that's why, I mean, everybody kind of jumps on. You see with these prisoners, we talked about this guy specifically with the whites because he's white and every group has their own kind of rules. But, even they're like, oh no,
Right.
he's done.
Sorry, unacceptable.
Bad behavior.
Unacceptable.
You're out. We're going to get you, you know? And so, I mean, who knows? It's like I said, it's a bad deal all around. And again, I'd like to add, I commend the men and women who go after these individuals, because it is truly what law enforcement is all about, is getting rid of these guys.
Yeah.
And girls.
You know, and that group that Brian and I worked for years, you know, that was a lot of the satisfaction was, you know, and again, I'm not going to go into a lot of the detail, but we went after a lot of nasty, dirty people that needed to get arrested. And that was very, very rewarding. I remember a number of cases, you know, Brian and I worked together with all the guys, and stuff had come together, but then we'd laugh because you could take off the most heinous criminal and it didn't matter, because about a minute later you're going, okay, what's next? What do we got to do now? We got to go do this. What's that? You know? So it's just a never ending cycle, unfortunately. But anyway, so Brian, you got anything else to add on the story, the incident at all?
That's it. It's a wrap.
I think you did a heck of a job. Like I said, I hope to get Brian in here again. I'm sure that I will. I will just have to ply him with Pepsi Cola and the promise of a nice time. Anyway, with the end of that disturbing story, take heart that person will not be doing that ever again to anybody. And guys, with that, I close this episode of I Barely Got Here. I want to thank you for listening, and if you like the show, please subscribe and post a review. Ask your friends to give it a listen as well. If you have any questions or comments, you can always email me at ibarelygothere@gmail.com, and you can also follow me on Instagram and Facebook. And with that, Sam42 and Brian are 10-7.